Hey everyone, DJ Short here with Eric Samulski, and it's time for another fantasy baseball Q&A. We are right here on the NBC Sports YouTube page. We'll be here probably for the next 30 minutes or so, 30, 45 minutes. And we'll dig into your fantasy questions here. Obviously, opening day, only 2 days away. And then it's the 6-month grind that gets started. Maybe you still have a fantasy draft going on. I have one tonight at 8 o'clock. You're in that league too. It's our,
I
our
am.
it's our staff league, which
Our
is
staff league, and then I have another NFBC online championship, and then I'm done. And then it's
yeah,
over for me.
yeah, and then the real work begins.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
So hopefully, you guys got the Rotoworld draft guide, the online draft guide, the magazine, but we're going to be here all season for you guys, and we'll be here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock throughout the regular season to answer your fantasy questions. So get your questions into the chat. We'll give you a little bit of time here to hop in and join us in this conversation. Obviously, yesterday, Eric, a lot of injuries that came down.
Yeah, tons.
And with very fantasy relevant names, Paul Sewald suffered a grade 2 oblique strain.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to think that's going to be a few weeks to hear grade 2. You don't like hearing that. So I would think Kevin Ginkel is like the stash there.
Yeah.
Does that seem pretty universal that that's the case?
I believe so. And I think, there were some smart people that were predicting that it wouldn't be a full on committee, but that Ginkel would steal some saves anyway. Sewald was a little bit less effective in the second half of the year. Ginkel was really good down the stretch for the Diamondbacks, and so him getting like 7 or 8 saves anyway seemed plausible. So I think they'll plug him in there, and I think that's a pretty good like spec for a month. Maybe I could see this lingering a month, because
Sure.
then Sewald will have to, once he's able to throw again, then he'll need to kind of ramp. I mean, relievers don't need to take that long to ramp up, but he will need to ramp up and get in some game action. And so Ginkel could be the closer there on a good team for a month.
Yeah, so if you came out of your draft feeling a little light on closers, there's certainly some names out there you can grab to get you at least through this early part of the season. And obviously, if you drafted Sewald, that's disappointing. But maybe you got the handcuff, or you're top of the priority list on waivers. But I think obviously, if you have fab dollars to spend and you're having your first run, that's going to be a pretty significant investment to get Ginkel there. One name I wanted to talk to you about, Brian Wu with the Mariners.
Yeah.
Went down with elbow inflammation. I think we're both fans of Brian Wu. I drafted him in Tout Wars, so a little disappointing to see how that went down. But I also think with the young names, the young pitchers in this rotation, they were probably going to have to manage innings anyway. So
Right.
not to say elbow inflammation is a good thing. It's certainly not. Hopefully it's not overly serious, but the Mariners are going to have to maneuver with these young arms anyway.
Sure. And they mentioned that the MRI came back clean. There was, no issue with the ligaments, nothing like that. There was just some inflammation in there. So, he rests and he shuts it down until the inflammation is gone. And then theoretically he should be in the clear. So I don't necessarily believe this is something that will linger. But, elbow and pitcher is always something that is a little bit, makes you a little bit uneasy. But I think most people were projecting about 140-ish innings from Wu anyway. So I don't really know that this throws him off of that course, except that they'll just be later.
Yeah.
Emerson Hancock is going to take the spot in the rotation. I don't love him. I think if you're in like a deeper league or an AL only league, you could certainly take a shot. I don't. He doesn't have the upside of some of these other Mariners pitchers. Don't really love the fastball and the fastball location. But good team, good park. So in a deeper format, why not? I don't think he's bad. I just don't think he's as exciting as what we've gotten used to with the Mariners pitching prospects.
And the other one I wanted to mention at the top here before we start answering some questions is Garrett Mitchell with the Brewers. Was in line to be the opening day center fielder, but now has a fractured hand. I don't know if I've heard an estimate yet of how long he will be sidelined, but obviously disappointing. Mitchell had a really hot start last year, then injured his shoulder, missed most of the season. But someone certainly with some fantasy upside there. So with Mitchell out, it seems like Sal Frelick, who was going to play some third base, maybe going back to the outfield now. Maybe Monasterio or Ortiz playing third base. I think that's probably how it's going to shake out, but still a shame about Mitchell.
Yeah, it's a shame about Mitchell. Again, just like you, I'm on Twitter right now. I don't see a timeline. Fractured hand again is something where like he won't swing until that's fully cleared up, and then he's going to have to swing and hopefully swing without pain, and then get the timing back. And so it could be a little while. TJ Friedel had a fractured wrist, and he's 6 to 8 weeks out now, and he injured himself I think like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I think maybe like 10 weeks for Mitchell feels like it's a rough, almost like a 3-month time frame. This is also like, I think this hurts Sal Frelick a little bit as well, because part of the value with him was going to be that he was going to move all over the field and not just be in the outfield. If he's just in the outfield, now he joins a list of guys that are going, in that range, kind of in like the back half of the top 200, who are outfielders who could give you some speed. He's maybe a 260, 270 type hitter. So I he's still going to play a lot, which is great, but I think that lack of multi-position eligibility is going to hurt him. And then I think maybe Joey Ortiz would start at third. Seems to be, I know people kind of are interested in Tyler Black, but I think Ortiz is probably the guy. And in deeper, if that is the case in deeper formats, in NL only formats, I do like Joey Ortiz. I think he's a solid player. One more piece of news we should mention is if you're interested, it seems as though the Rockies settled on Justin Lawrence as their closer. It was between Justin Lawrence and Tyler Kinley, and there was no like firm word, but it appears as though they've said it's Justin Lawrence. If you're willing to chase that. I mean, look, Lawrence was good enough last year that he was rostered in a lot of leagues. Closers only have to go 1 inning most times, so they're not as impacted by cores, but 3.72 ERA with 11 saves and a 24% strikeout rate is certainly usable in a lot of formats. So just something to monitor if you need saves.
Rocky saves. They're out there, you hold your nose and you pick one. All right. So let's get to our questions here. First question from Dave. Why is Miami so tight-lipped about Yandy Perez? Who would be your top 3 fill-ins? So it doesn't seem like they're tight-lipped. There was some news that came out over the weekend that there was no structural damage in the elbow. He's resumed some light throwing, but obviously much too soon to say. I think it's going to be one of those things where they ramp him up and they see if there's discomfort, and if there isn't, then he'll keep progressing. So I think there's still obviously some question marks about his status.
Yeah, I think it was just one of those things where it took so long to hear what was happening, and then when we did hear what was happening, it came over the weekend when so much other news was coming out that it kind of got buried. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think treat this the way you would treat the Garrett Cole situation, right? Like if you feel confident that, Cole's going to just rest and rehab and come back and he's going to be fine, then you could say the same about Yandy Perez. But again, I'm a little more concerned. And then also the fact that Perez is younger and really important to the Marlins' future and his future development. I don't know that they would rush him. In terms of the second part of this, like who are your top 3 fill-ins? I think we know that. I assume he's talking about the Marlins.
I don't know. I think you might be just talking fantasy in general.
But fantasy in general is tough because I don't know like where
there's so many, right?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, I would say that like guys who are probably on waivers, who like just recently won starting jobs, like if you can pick up Casey Mize or a Jared Jones or a Luis Heel or Reese Olson, those are guys who I don't know why I just only picked righties because Perez is a
Well,
righty, but
Jack
those are guys who
Flaherty,
like
I was just looking up Jack
Jack
Flaherty,
Flaherty.
only
Yeah,
roster in 28% of Yahoo leagues right now. Like
yeah.
with the velocity up, he's had a good spring. Like I really like him. I think he should be rostered more.
Yeah, I moved him into my like low 50s in my last starting pitcher ranking, which is like I didn't publish that today, but it's kind of like I'll guess a little bit for myself before
Yeah.
these drafts. But yeah, I think he's looked really good. And then Max Meyer could be another option. I prefer all the other guys that we just mentioned because I don't know how long of a leash Max Meyer has. But there's certainly a lot of pitchers out there. And I will say, just in terms of the Marlins, I know that the thought is like Max Meyer made the rotation because of this. And then when Braxton Garrett comes back, which could be in just a couple of weeks, that Max Meyer will lose the rotation spot. But if Braxton Garrett comes back and they take Meyer out, they will have 5 left-handed starters in their rotation. And it's pretty rare to see that.
Yeah.
And so I think you could be looking at like performance dependent Trevor Rogers, Ryan Weathers in the first couple weeks of the year. If one of those guys really struggles, I think you could see Braxton Garrett fill in for one of them and keep Max Meyer in the rotation. It's important to also know that Edward Cabrera is already throwing simulated games, so he's probably only a few weeks away too, and then he would come and take that other spot. So there's going to be a lot of moving pieces for the Marlins.
For sure. But if Yuri Perez is out for any length of time, it's really hard to see them competing for a wild card spot. I think he's that important. Yeah. All right. Up next here, which not so obvious next prospects could make their debut relatively soon? Not talking Skeens, Caminero, etc. Definitely got my eye on Chase DeLauder. Any other bats and young pitchers that you suggest?
Yeah, Chase DeLauder. He looked great. I know Kobe Mayo may be obvious, but he's not listed there, so I'm going to mention Kobe Mayo. Yeah. I think the Nationals outfielders we're not going to see until August probably, but I think they will be up. Same thing with Jackson Jobe. I think he's up, but I think it's later this year. I don't see a reason to bring him up. If the we talked about this on our betting show. If the Tigers are in contention, it's because their pitching helped carry them. If they're not in contention, I don't know that they're going to rush Jobe up until the end of the season. Matt Shaw for the Cubs is interesting. They've been playing him a lot at third base in the spring. And I think that's like a fallback for Merill. And Shaw is somebody who, in June, July or whatever could push his way up. And then Owen Cassie, I think is how he pronounces his last name. The outfielder on the Cubs is another guy who could push his way up. And then he may not be the biggest name prospect, but Drew Gilbert is one step away from the Mets outfield. He is a pretty well-regarded prospect.
Did you say that for me?
I just think it's an interesting, he's not somebody where you're like, oh my God, I have to stash him. But when your outfield is Starling Marte and Harrison Bader and guys who have a tendency to get hurt, knowing who the next guy up in AAA is important. And so I think that Gilbert is a guy who could be up relatively soon if injuries strike.
Christian Scott with the Mets too is another one where, his outing last week, he looked dominant, looked nasty, and I don't think he's far off, and there will be opportunities in that rotation. So
and AJ Smith-Shawver for the Braves, I think it wouldn't surprise me if he was the next guy up. Bryce Elder looked really bad in the spring, and Smith-Shawver looked really good. And again, you have a pitching staff with Chris Sale and Charlie Morton. You don't really know when injuries are going to strike, and so I think AJ Smith-Shawver could be up relatively soon as well.
Are you a believer in Pete Crow Armstrong? I know defensively he's excellent and has the speed, but can he hit enough is the question.
I think I'm a believer in him more as a real life prospect than as a fantasy prospect. I would not be stashing him or aggressively trying to add him, even if he gets called up. I think obviously if I'm in a deep league or an NL only and I know he's getting called up, sure. But in most redraft leagues, I'd kind of want to see it at the MLB level first.
Next, one of your favorite topics, Mason Miller, still listed on Yahoo as a starting pitcher. How long should he be held on to until we have a chance to know if he'll take
All
over?
season.
Yeah,
Hold him all season. Like, I, Yahoo, I believe it's 5 relief appearances until
hmm
he becomes a reliever. Even if he's not a closer, he's going to get 5 relief appearances within the first 2 to 3 weeks.
for sure. With that,
Um,
he's pitching stuff. Yes.
and so, I've said this so many times before. Like, I think Mason Miller has value, even if he's just a multi-inning reliever, because
Yeah.
first of all, he could pick up a few sneaky wins that way, but he's going to rack up strikeouts. His stuff is dominant. He's going to get you more innings and Ks than a normal reliever would. And I do think eventually, first of all, I think he might be the closer right from the start. I really do. And even if he's not, I think he emerges into that role. Wouldn't surprise me if he gets 15 plus saves and you're going to get pretty good ratios and a lot of Ks.
Yeah, and I think there's value in that, middle reliever, multi-inning type guy, as opposed to like, using a streamer you're not fully confident in,
Right.
right? Over the course of a week, like that adds up.
Yeah, I think also, as opposed to dumpster diving for saves with like Justin Lawrence, let's just say, like, yes, he is the Rockies closer. We don't know if Mason Miller is, the A's closer. I don't care. Like, that's not a question for me, really.
Mhm.
I'm taking Mason Miller over any of the Brewers guys. Like, I don't know what that situation is. I'm taking Mason Miller over Griffin Jacks. Like, I know we think it's Griffin Jacks right now with Yohan Duran out, but like, how long does that last? And I just think Mason Miller is a really good overall pitcher, and so I have no problem taking him. I'm actively trying to get him wherever I can, except in our staff league tonight. You should let him go and just see what happens.
Well, one thing we can count on, I think like Mason Miller is going to be one of those favorites where we see constant gifts.
Oh, for sure.
So get ready for that. Up next, Dillan Cease has received quite a bit of negative verbiage this winter/spring. Is there any chance he recovers some of the ground lost over the last few seasons? We talked about Cease a week ago on the heels of the trade, and it's all about control, right? If he can demonstrate better control, I think we're talking about a different pitcher. I think the ballpark change is good. The division worse for sure, but I think for him it's all about control.
Yeah. I think there's some good defense behind him as well. It's all about control. I did see an interesting Lance Brazowski tweet earlier today that he thinks that the last start Cease was toying with a sweeper because he was throwing a slider that had movement that none of his sliders last year had. So like, maybe the Padres have a plan for him to like shape the pitch mix a little bit. It's hard to make those kind of changes in the middle of the season and have them stick immediately. So it's such a hard question to answer because I think it's a personal opinion on whether or not you think that Dillan Cease can regain some of the command that he had flashed previously. I have him inside of my top 30 starting pitchers, but like just. So I'm not like super bullish, but I also know the talent is there.
I blew most of my fab in NL only labor to get Dillan Cease in the first fab run this week. Like 3/4 of my fab. But the way that I view getting him is that it opens up trade possibilities later where, yes, I don't have the fab anymore, but if I'm lacking in one area, I can trade a starting pitcher, assuming, they're healthy. I have Walker Buehler that's going to start the year in my IL. So if he comes back and it looks like himself, I'll feel a lot better about supplementing another part of my roster.
Right.
So I was willing to, just bite the bullet and make sure I got him.
In that league, I think that makes total sense.
Yeah. So here we go. It's a good question. What are possible reasons to drop a player, especially early in the season when we realize some players may be better than advertised? Will you have a column that recommends droppable players? That is a really good point. Because often we're just talking about like, pick them up. Like, that's the articles are very optimistic, but you're rarely like, drop this guy, right?
Well, I guess I guess, considering I will be doing a Sunday waiver column this year, I guess we can add a drops section into that column. Guys who are under a certain threshold who should be on teams, and guys who are over a certain threshold who should be off teams.
But I think the big question here is like, how much data do you need to change your preseason evaluation?
Right.
I think is always like, that's the needle you have to thread in the first month of the season, where it's like, if you don't grab the guy that got off to a hot start, you're missing your opportunity. People are going to pick him up, but in what leagues can you take more of a risk than others is the question.
Well, good news for this person. First of all, Scott Pianowski and I had an entire podcast on early season strategy, which came out on the Rotoworld baseball show on Monday. So you can check out that episode. And I will have an article coming out tomorrow on early season baseball strategy that covers a lot of this stuff. So that will be over at NBC Sports on Wednesday. The quick answer to this is like what Scott and I mentioned is guys who you drafted with confidence, like that because that will depend on your draft and your league or whatever. But the guys you picked with confidence deserve to have a few weeks of cushion, right? At whatever point you are in your draft where you were like not really like as sold on somebody, but they seem to hit value or they seem to like be a category you needed, like that cutoff will be different depending on your draft. Those guys, you can be a little quicker on the trigger. I think the key things to look at early in the season are very obviously playing time, right? If the playing time is different than we expected it to be, both in terms of starting and platooning, things like that, or also where somebody hits in the lineup. If you thought somebody was going to hit first and they're hitting eighth, those are things that could drastically impact production. And I think those obviously are the immediate signs. Like if the guy hits the same spot in the lineup the first 3 games, like that is his spot in the lineup. And then I look at also like walks and strikeouts, like those plate discipline things. If those things are like really a warning sign, I think that would be a reason to drop a player early. With pitchers, I'm quicker on the hook with pitchers, but I try to watch as much as I can. I try to either use MLB.TV or YouTube or whatever to watch and not just look at the box score. But if I see a pitcher who didn't have a great box score the first game and I watch it and I just don't love how the pitches look, I don't love the command, the control, like I'll move on.
Right.
I don't think there's a need to really hold on to those like end of your roster pitchers. Also use the schedule for pitchers. If you're not convinced about a pitcher and they face the Braves and then go at Coors the next 2 starts, that's probably a good time to drop that pitcher, pick up the hitter who's really hot right now, and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle. Because if you're not sold on that pitcher and he has 2 really difficult starts you're not going to use him for, like why would you keep him on your bench for 2 weeks and miss the possibility of picking up somebody who could really help you down the road? And if that hitter flames out, then fine, then there might be another hitter, there might be another pitcher.
The newly extended Ezekiel Tovar, question from Sean. Tovar was dropped in my league. What are thoughts on him? So with Tovar, I mean, we know he's an excellent defensive shortstop. So that gives him, the leash to go through the struggles, which he had last year. His strikeout rate was almost 30%. So that, kept the average down, but still it's Coors Field. And he has that going for him. There's double-digit homer steal potential. I think he could steal 25 bases if he gets on base more often. I see him as more of a middle infielder type than a true starting shortstop. But I'd like to see a little more progress with the plate discipline this season.
Agreed. Plate discipline concerns me in the sense of like I can't really predict him to hit much better than he did last year, maybe like 260. So I think if you operate under the fact that like he's a 260 hitter who will go 15-15 in a pretty mediocre lineup, if that is your baseline, there's value there. If you're in, you're looking for a middle infield option. And listen, 15 steals there's nothing to sneeze at. But I wouldn't be running out to add him.
Right. I agree. As long as you keep your expectations in check. It's kind of a different situation than CJ Abrams, who I know you're a fan of. Struggled in the first half last year, then moved to the top of the lineup for the Nationals. Seemed to really spark him. Much better numbers, plate discipline wise, and obviously was very active on the base paths. Do you see a breakout coming for him this year, full-fledged one?
No, I think we saw it last year, right? Like I think a breakout for him is repeating what he did last year with maybe a little bit better batting average, which he showed in the second half of the year when he hit in like 258, I think, when they moved him to the leadoff spot.
Yeah.
So like if he hits 20 home runs and steals over 40 bases and hits 255, 260, like I think that solidifies that what he did last year was real. I think that's what he needs to do. I don't know that we're getting. I don't believe that he's like a 300 hitter. I don't believe that he's like a 25 homer hitter. So I don't really know that there's tons more upside than we saw last year. I think it's more just about showcasing that last year wasn't a fluke, and a lot of people believe that it was.
So I'm trying to look up CJ Abrams for leading the majors in stolen bases this season, because I feel like the value on him is pretty good the last time I looked at it. So Ronald Acuna Jr. is the favorite at plus 150. I'm using DraftKings right now, but feel free to shop around. Then it's Estuary Ruiz, Ellie De La Cruz, Corbin Carroll. CJ Abrams is plus 800 to lead the majors in stolen bases. I think that's doable for him. I think a full season in a leadoff spot, like the upside is there for him to steal like 60. He could do it.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned Estuary Ruiz. I think it's safe to point out, like, a lot of sites are projecting that he's not a starter. And a lot of the recent Oakland lineups, he has not been with the starters. He was an atrocious defensive outfielder last year. And we already know he doesn't bring a lot of value with the bat other than his speed. If you're not really going to hit and you're not going to play defense, but you're going to run, people made the Billy Hamilton jokes, but that's what you become. Which is great news for our guy Lawrence Butler, who might slide into the starting lineup.
Yeah, we shall see. Thomas with a question here about AL only leagues. He has his auction/salary cap draft coming up. Is Brian Wu worth keeping at 7, or should I move him for a 7-unit catcher in Jake Rogers? And keep in mind, this is AL only, so I understand that having that catcher spot filled and getting something out of it is valuable. I think I would want to know what kind of your alternatives are as far as catchers to really answer this question. I think the upside of Wu is greater, and I would probably hold on him.
I agree. I think that obviously depends on. I assume there's an IL spot in this league, but that would be my suggestion as well. Also, like I'm not so sold on Jake Rogers because just earlier this week, the Tigers beat writer for The Athletic, Cody Stavenhagen, tweeted, "The Tigers really like what Carson Kelly has done this spring. He may end up getting a good chunk of playing time alongside Jake Rogers." Carson Kelly hit 289 this spring with 3 home runs in 15 games. Remember that, like, it wasn't long ago that Carson Kelly was like a highly regarded catching prospect. He was pretty good in 2019. He has battled, and it was good when he played in 2021. He's battled injuries, and the last 2 years have not been good for performance. But I think there's a shot that that's closer to a 50-50 split in terms of playing time, where, like, if I was going to give up Wu, I would need to be getting back somebody that I felt I didn't have to move on. I wasn't at risk of moving on from later on in the season.
Yeah, that's a good point. Michael with a question. We were talking about prospects earlier who could arrive at some point this season. Michael here mentions Jonathan Clase with the Mariners. He made it to Double-A last year. He played in 108 games. He struck out 28% of the time. Power, speed is there for sure, but I think there's questions to answer about his approach before he gets a real shot. Someone I'd keep an eye on, but not someone I'd be like stashing or anything.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you steal 79 bases in a season, you attract attention. People that I trust that do prospect stuff say that he's going to be up in 2025. So that would kind of be where I would lean, because I just trust the people who, dig into this every day.
And Victor Scott the second is another name to keep an eye on for stolen bases. We'll see if he was sent down. We'll see what happens with that outfield. Dylan
Carlson injury, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that changed it. I don't know.
It's the Cardinals, man. I just feel like, and also because if you think about like Lars Nootbaar is it only seems like he's a few weeks away. So I don't think that you call up Victor Scott to send him down in 2 or 3 weeks when Nootbaar comes back. I know we really want to see Victor Scott up. I just think they're going to call him up when he can stay. And I don't know that that's right now.
I feel like, Carlson has been like a trade candidate for so long that maybe this is the year he actually gets traded. We'll see. And they make room for Scott at some point. I think the Cardinals are due for a little bit of a bounce back this season. We're doing our predictions. We're going to have a staff predictions article come out on opening day on Thursday. I think the NL Central is really interesting. We talked about it on the podcast. I could see the Reds winning it. I could see the Cubs winning it. I could see the Cardinals winning it. Sorry, Pirates.
Honestly, both Centrals. I mean, the AL Central was interesting, and none of the teams seem great. Rather than the NL Central, seems like there could be a few good teams, but both those divisions seem relatively wide open, with the exception of the Chicago White Sox, who are probably not contending for anything.
Yeah. Okay. Up next, we have time for a couple more questions. So if you have something on your mind, feel free to shoot it in the chat. We'll try to get to it before we go. Row Prime with the question: is it worth it to take flyers on injured pitchers in NL only leagues? I mean, I'll just say a blanket yes, absolutely. Yeah. But timing is the question here. Walker Buehler, Kodai Senga, Devin Williams. I mean, in an NL only league, all these guys should be drafted. Like, they shouldn't be on the waiver wire, I would think. But we don't really know the timing. I think the Mets have had a positive report on Kodai Senga recently, but he's still a long way off. I would think like middle of May at the earliest for him. Buehler, I really don't know. We haven't heard a ton about it. So that's a big question for me.
Yeah, I think also you kind of want one of these guys. Obviously, again, another depends on your league and how many IL spots you have, right? But you don't want to take on too many of these flyers, in particular in a draft, right? You don't want to, especially in an NL only, you don't want to use so many picks in a draft on guys who won't produce for the first month or two of the season, or more in Devin Williams' case, because you're just missing the opportunity to draft people who you can actually put in your lineup and who will play every day. But I think these are the perfect formats to take shots on guys like this. I took Shane Baz in an AL only, and he's probably not back. He's not going to be up till June, but I think that that's a really valuable player for me from June on. So, if I have one guy who's in that spot, I think that that's a great use of space.
So Lulu with a question here. He says, gents, Jordan Walker or Jackson Chourio as a fourth outfielder? I love this question because a year ago, all we could talk about was Jordan Walker. And now this year it's Jackson Chourio. And I don't know if there's like a lesson in that you take the more experienced guy. But I think I would take Walker here.
Yes, I would take Walker here. I do think that we sometimes lose sight of, a player that we were really high on because they I guess I don't want to say disappointed. He didn't disappoint. He had a pretty solid season as a 21-year-old in the major leagues. I know it didn't set the world on fire. And we keep looking for somebody to come up and do that. But I think the expectation should be that he's better. So does he hit 280 with 20 home runs and 10 stolen bases? I don't see Jackson Chourio doing that this year.
Right. All right. We'll do one more unless you guys get something else in the chat. One more before we go. Meadows or Merill, a pair of rookies here, head-to-head categories, league. Who do you like better? I think it may depend on what eligibility Merill has and whatever format you're playing. And some might have him listed as a shortstop, which makes him a little more interesting to me.
Yeah, I think most leagues will have him as a shortstop and shortstop/outfield. It's Meadows for me. Earlier in the year, I did the who's the next Josh Lowe. I really like what Meadows brings to the table from a prospect standpoint. I think there's power. I think there's speed. I think there's enough average to hit, 250 to 260. I know the batting average didn't look great in his small sample last year. I think he's going to hit leadoff.
Yeah.
And Jackson Merrill is hitting ninth for the Padres. So, counting stats impacts there. So yeah, I'm big on Parker Meadows this year. And so I would lean him. Actually, I would pretty firmly pick him of those two.
I don't know if this is breaking news or fake news or what, but Dylan Carlson sprained AC joint in left shoulder and will open season on the IL. Victor Scott added to roster. Again, this is only one source saying this, so we'll have to confirm it. But if that's the case, which wouldn't be a surprise after that collision.
It is actually of 12 seconds ago.
Okay.
Katie Wu, who covers the Cardinals for The Athletic, said Victor Scott II is en route to Phoenix.
Ooh, there you go. So if you're drafting tonight, late round flyer, Scott is the guy who could lead the majors in stolen bases if they let him run. He has that kind of speed. So it's a downer for Carlson for sure. We never root for injuries, but a guy like Scott can be very, very exciting.
Yeah, and I think that there's more in the bat than people like. He was unfairly comped to Estrella Ruiz because he doesn't have great hard hit data from the minor leagues, but he looked good in the AFL. I think he is he's not going to hit for major home runs as a MLB prospect, but I think there is a bat there. He will hit. He'll have a solid average. He's can drive a few out of the park when needed, and the speed is a major calling card. But this isn't he needs to steal first sort of situation. I think he will get on first more often than not.
Last one before we go, predictions on Tyler Glasnow. Now, my feeling on it, especially this year with so many, top tier pitchers down, Garrett Cole being the latest, no pitcher's safe. I think Garrett Cole is the evidence of that. So knowing that and knowing Tyler Glasnow's injury history, I'm just kind of when he pitches, he's elite. I'm going to take him and just deal with it. You expect at some point maybe he'll go down, but great team, has the lineup, has a good bullpen backing him. Maybe defense is not great, but Tyler Glasnow, I view him as a top 10 starting pitcher right now.
I have him ninth, so I wouldn't disagree with you there. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get 140 innings out of him. I know he's never done that before, but Tommy John honeymoon, and I think I think he's in for a solid year.
Agreed. So this will end our time together this week. We'll be back next Tuesday and every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern to talk fantasy baseball. Enjoy opening day. It's always such a fun day. Eric and I will put out some reactions over the course of the day. So make sure to follow us on Twitter. I'm at DJ Short. Eric is at Samski NYC. We'll see you guys soon. Good luck if you have some drafts and enjoy opening day.